Alongside the new 5 stars Anemo main DPS, Mihoyo released a new dedicated support for the Anemo type, namely Faruzan. Ever since she first got announced in beta, it was already apparent that Faruzan would be quite strong in her role, as her kit boasted the best multitude of buffs a single support ever had, especially at Constellation 6. Still, it was also clear that she had some flaws, namely energy generation, which would balance out how strong she was in terms of buffing capabilities. However, many people still presumed she would still be great at Constellation 0, since she provided unique things such as Anemo resistance shred, and damage calculation-wise still had a major impact on Anemo characters' damage output. Since she released today, her flaws at low Constellation levels became fully apparent, and I can confidently say that among the 4 stars characters whose potential is locked behind constellations, she might be the worst case yet, at least among those that released after launch. First of all, let's see what Faruzan can do at Constellation 0, in terms of supporting capabilities. She provides around 30% Anemo damage buff to the whole team at talent level 9, reduces opponents' resistance to Anemo by 30, and applies a flat attack effect buff to Anemo damage, on a regular cooldown. All of this is accessible through her burst, which has an 80 energy cost. To fund this costly elemental burst, all she has is an elemental skill that produces 2 particles, granted you hit an opponent with a charged attack after you used it. Not only this is rather clunky, but also unreliable as missing the charged attack is a possibility you can't ignore. To quantify how bad this is, Faruzan already needs around 300% ER assuming she holds Favonius Warbow and she lands her charged attack. If you consider a scenario where she misses it, the ER requirement jumps to an impossibly high 350%. By itself, this isn't even that big of a deal, as Faruzan provides a lot of good things even at Constellation 0, and considering how Mihoyo has balanced the 4 stars characters who came out in the past 2 years, this caveat doesn't look unreasonable. What looks unreasonable, however, is how much of her power level is locked behind her constellations, specifically her Constellation 6. In fact, while her Constellation 2 is a nice elemental burst duration extension that helps Xiao especially, and her Constellation 4 is a decent refund in terms of energy regained through her elemental burst hits, those are nothing unprecedented in terms of 4 stars characters' constellations. The Constellation 6, however, is a whole different deal, despite it might not seem like that at first glance, since the only numerical aspect shown there is the critical damage increase by 40% for all Anemo damage on the team, which while strong, it's also been a common thing for elemental supports so far. In fact, the bad part lies in the things Mihoyo isn't explicitly telling you. To elaborate on this, an important part of the constellation is how, when the active character deals damage while under the effect of her elemental burst, pressurized collapses will be generated, every 3 seconds. For those who are unaware, the pressurized collapse is the grouping effect her elemental skill generates. This effect also generates the particles her elemental skill generates, on a 5.5 seconds cooldown. Since her elemental skill has a 6 seconds cooldown, you could say that this constellation turns her elemental skill in an off-field effect that procs automatically on cooldown, without the need to use an annoying charged attack. The positive effects of this are massive. Let's see what Faruzan gains from her C6, in total. Her elemental burst buffs stay the same, excluding the normal talent level buffs from her constellations which slightly increases their values. Her particle generation per rotation jumps from a pitiful 0 to 2, to a respectable 6 to 8. Overall, even in the worst case scenario, you will require just 200% energy recharge on your Faruzan, which is very easily attainable. The 6 additional particles are a huge difference for the other Anemo characters on the team as well, as both Xiao and Wanderer require just around 120% ER to use their burst every rotation with C6 Faruzan, and more than 170% with C5 Faruzan. It's not over yet. Since the pressurized collapses count as elemental skill hits, the Constellation 6 allows Faruzan to reliably proc the tenacity of the Millilith artifact set effect, granting the rest of the team a pretty consistent additional 20% attack buff if she equips that. Add to that the grouping utility, which while not incredible, it's definitely useful to avoid opponents from getting knocked back too much by things such as Shao plunges, and this Constellation 6 definitely starts to look like one of the most shameless moves Mihoyo has ever pulled on us. I understand that Anemo main damage dealers needed a strong buff to become great in the current meta, but putting a big chunk of that into a Constellation 6 is just a bad thing for all customers. Considering the artifact buff as well, the Constellation 6 alone, based on my calcs, is a 25 to 30% damage increase in team damage over Constellation 5. That value is just absurd if you consider Nahida's Constellation 2, which is widely considered one of the strongest constellations in the game, buffs her team's damage by just around 20%. I'm done now. If you found this video helpful, please leave a like and subscribe. See you next time.